This City 17 vista is an explicit visual reward for surviving the elevator battle. Since early playtesters told us that we weren't communicating just how damaged the city was, this sweeping view of an extremely messed up City 17 serves a practical purpose, as well as being a nice moment of calm between storms. The framing of your first view of the Citadel in this vista space is very deliberate. We included various leading elements, such as wires and light poles, that all drive the player's eye to the Citadel.
One thing we try to do when we're integrating storytelling and gameplay, something that's become a hallmark of ours, is to include non-linear bits of narrative. Things that action-oriented players don't have to sit through, but that are available to players who want to learn more about the background of the story. Kleiner's broadcasts on the public address monitors are a good example of this method. Apart from the strong visual image of Dr. Kleiner replacing his former boss on the giant screens, his speech conveys a lot of dense information about the state of the world and how things have changed due to the events of Half-Life 2. We settled on this particular location for the Kleiner cast as one of the few logical places where players can watch in peace or move on to the next encounter. It's essentially a footnote embedded in the world, which makes this a footnote on a footnote.
Later in the level, there's a Combine gunner protected behind some metal plates, just like the ones blocking the player's way here. We placed them here as a training tool to remind players that the gravity gun can grab and detach these things.
Behind you!
Repelling Soldiers presented a difficult training problem because we found it's tough to focus the player's attention upward. This entire alley was carefully designed to ensure that the player would see the descending soldiers. First, we framed the soldiers with a straight line of buildings. Then we had them run across the rooftops so they were starkly silhouetted against the sky before they dropped down in front of the lightly colored buildings. Finally, we added a distinctive sound to the repelling action so that the players would recognize it later in the game.
Character AI is all about putting on a good show. As we neared the end of production, we were still unhappy with the way that Alex handled herself in combat. The most common thing she did was run backwards while shooting at the enemies. It was fairly realistic, but kinda boring. So we added crouching and aiming at the last minute. And though it didn't really change her combat effectiveness in any functional way, it made her a whole lot more fun to watch. And this is a really good example of how these relatively minor presentation and behavior changes can often have a really major impact on entertainment value.
The post-Half-Life 2 look of City 17 was difficult to nail down, and we went through many changes. We wanted to establish several things, primarily that this was a different part of the same city with a slightly different atmosphere, and that it had been severely damaged. This street was a test bed for a lot of our visual design work. First, we built an intact city street, then we beat up certain buildings, in some cases removing them entirely so that more destruction was visible in the distance. We did an initial lighting pass in the game engine and then took screenshots of various locations. Using Photoshop, we manipulated those screenshots to establish a color scheme. Photoshop lets us quickly iterate through all kinds of skies, lighting styles, and color schemes. The environmental lighting colors that we ended up with were based on some photo references of the sun filtering through smoke from a forest fire. Some falling ash effects and a closer than usual fog plane helped sell the effect.
Trip mine traps are great, but they were sort of hard to justify given the total chaos of City 17. Even though we couldn't use trip mines a lot, they made sense in this uninterrupted ambush scene. This explosion permanently seals the cafe door, which has a few benefits. From a design perspective, we found that when we limit the amount of backtracking players can do, it gives them confidence to venture forward. And from a practical standpoint, we can clean up the now unreachable entities, giving us a big reduction in overhead. It also helps to minimize potential bugs and exploits. Originally, the player didn't get any weapons until the end of this map, so roller mines were the only way to kill the soldiers. As we added more content to previous levels, it became impractical for players to be without a gun for so long. As a result, players get weapons much earlier now.
We can't get through here while that sniper's covering
One of the primary design goals of Episode 1 was to convey the sense that Alex and the player are a team. This sniper sequence provides an opportunity for Alex to offer combat support in a cool new way. It also gives the player a chance to watch zombies get sniped up close and from various angles.
Players didn't have any weapons in the original version of this map. That made it a lot more important to remove the boards with a gravity gun so that Alex could snipe the zombies. Once weapons were added though, the sky bridge became less of a puzzle and more of a straightforward combat event. We added more zombies to increase the challenge, but pulling the boards off is still the most fun way to get through this section.
Our AI is inherently unscripted, which means that we have to design spaces that permit our characters to make good choices. The AI is better able to make intelligent decisions when there are alternate routes to a combat space. This hallway started out as a straight-shot corridor with a door at the end for soldiers to enter through. This design didn't provide the AI with enough choices to make the soldier behavior very interesting. Adding an additional space on the side allowed them to find cover and flank the player, both of which dramatically improved the entertainment value of this encounter.
The first prototype of Episode 1's door blast effect was here in the Combine garrison. Being peppered with chunks of wood while soldiers poured into the room through a haze of smoke proved to be an effective dramatic tool. It was also an excellent way to simultaneously ungate the player and flood the area with enemies. It was so unanimously successful in playtests that we ended up adding it in several places throughout the episode.
At this point in the action, we really felt that we needed a combat crescendo. Antline guards make great boss challenges, and we decided to add some Combine forces to the mix because watching AI characters fight each other is always entertaining. This setup had a few other benefits as well. Since players had previously only fought alone against the guards, this was the first time they'd actually witnessed secondhand the effects of a guard headbutt. They'd also see an APC in action, and in case there was any doubt, get definite proof that Combine soldiers and Antline guards don't get along, underscoring the collapse of Combine government in City 17.
Antline guard arenas have a few specific design requirements. For instance, since the guard is only armed with a melee attack, we can't let the player reach any place that's inaccessible to the guard, such as rooftops and other high perches, that the player could only arrive at after being launched by a guard headbutt. The arenas also need plenty of physics objects for the guard to toss, and at least one unlimited ammo crate, so that the player can't run out of ammunition before killing the guard. For this battle, we also introduced a steady stream of regular antlions to limit the player's ability to constantly circle the antline guard.
In early versions of this area, there was no side passage off the street, and the gash in the road was created by the gunship that the player later fights in the hospital attic. As development progressed, however, gameplay, story, and performance requirements made this initial design unworkable. The new side passage provided a short break in the combat tension after the boss battle, and also helped us stay within our performance budget.
After the Antline guard fight, playtesters were reporting some combat fatigue. We decided to include an environmental puzzle here to break up the pacing before the subsequent street battle. We originally worried that a densely packed room full of hopper mines, trip mines, and explosive barrels was a little too implausible, but playtesters loved the sudden reveal of the room and then enjoyed navigating it. So this ended up being another case where we accepted a trade-off between fun and maintaining a strictly consistent fiction. At one point, this was the site of a physically simulated elevator puzzle. It was kind of neat, but it caused a lot of problems in playtests. Even though the puzzle mostly obeyed the laws of physics, it wasn't all in line with the way we had trained players to expect elevators to work in our world. We considered adding some earlier training to support it, but quickly abandoned the idea in favor of a redesign that was more immediately understandable while still being fun. This space was designed to lure players onto a section of breakable floor that drops them into a room full of zombies. Players are enticed into the trap by some reward items and a chance to peek in the hole. We like to surprise players, but we never want them to feel like they've been treated unfairly.
Barney, like Dr. Kleiner, is one of the characters with the deepest roots in Half-Life 1. His personality is more iconic and retains more of the comic stylization of the first game. This type of character allows us to mix up the mood a little bit, to inject some absurd humor into the otherwise grim scenarios of the Half-Life universe. While characters such as Alex and Eli Vance have allowed us to explore more realistic dramatic possibilities, we're still very much attached to our roots in satire and black humor.
You guys know about the evacuation.
Barney's big crowbar scene here required a few tricks to pull off. There are actually 3 separate crowbar models in this sequence. First, there's the one stuck in the machine. When Barney grabs that one, we remove it from the world and switch on a second crowbar that's been in Barney's hand the entire time, only invisible. Both of these models are purely decorative, so as soon as Barney makes his tossing motion, we hide the second crowbar and create a third usable crowbar that then bounces to the ground.
Safe path to the station. You two head that way. I'll hit the streets and round up everyone who's been waiting. We'll meet you there.
Sounds good. Let's go.
Hey, Gordon, before you go, I was getting tired of carrying this around. Listen, I don't have many more of these, so try not to lose this one, okay? Go on across, Gordon. She's waiting for you. You lucky dog, you.
Whenever possible, we like to foreshadow impending boss battles by introducing the enemy before the actual fight. In this case, you know you're going to be seeing that gunship again pretty soon. Instead of letting the gunship AI have its own way here, we forced the ship to crash right into the attic. It's a dramatic payoff for winning the battle, and it gives players an opportunity to examine a gunship up close at their leisure.
We designed this gunship battle to create a dynamic, evolving experience, while still keeping the player within a constrained area. Initially, the space appears straightforward and provides plenty of cover. As the environment gets progressively more damaged, combat becomes more challenging. Players are increasingly open to enemy fire, and the path to the rocket crate becomes more difficult to navigate. As the roof breaks apart, however, the gunship also becomes more visible, and therefore easier to hit, keeping things relatively balanced. The lighting in this area was tuned to play off of the HDR tone mapping effects, between the dark inner spaces and the progressively open, bright sky above.